What's up, everybody? It's Chris Lee back with another United Destiny Entertainment tutorial video. And check this out. What I'm going to be doing with this video is showing you guys how to build a PC from scratch for gaming, recording, making beats, whatever you want to call it. If you haven't done it yet, keep on watching this video. Alright guys, so all I'm going to pretty much be doing with this video is building a recording PC from scratch. This is going to allow me to play games. This is going to allow me to record music. It's going to allow me to make beats. It's going to allow me to edit photos, edit some videos, whatever the case may be. I am going to be able to do everything with this system that I'm going to be building right here. This is very inexpensive. I will be doing more of a cheaper build or putting some parts in the description box to help you guys who want to build you something from scratch that's going to be a little bit more inexpensive. As far as say, if you just want to record some music and make some beats, you may not need a graphics card or something like that. Also, you may not need a whole lot of memory, but I still would recommend that if you're going to do a basic build, I still would recommend that you go for 16 gigs of memory, and we'll talk about all that later. But as of right now, I'm going to go ahead and get into this build. So we have here a pretty inexpensive case from Dark Flash. This is a micro ATX case. It wasn't that expensive. A lot of these parts are going to be relatively inexpensive for this build. Here is a Prime B450 motherboard. This is going from Asus. This is going to be great for this particular build and the needs for it. Also, for our starter drive or our main drive, we're going to have a SSD 240 gigs from Kingston. This is going to help our operating system boot up pretty fast. I recommend anybody building a PC in general to either get a M.2 drive or just get a SSD like this. This is going to help your computer boot up really quick, as well as your programs opening up pretty fast. Also, I got some Corsair DDR4 3200 memory. This is 16 gigs. This is going to be perfect for gaming. We're going to be able to get some gaming and some recording done with this computer. We shouldn't have any problem with, effects processing or anything like that. So this is going to be perfect for this type of setup. I did get 3200. I could have went with the 3000 or something a little bit lower. But since I'm going to be running the Ryzen AMD 2600 processor, it pretty much likes all Ryzen CPUs pretty much like faster RAM. So we're going to go with 3200 in this board. I know that I probably could have went a little bit higher, but I'll try to keep it inexpensive. I didn't want this build to be too much. This is probably around like a $700 build or something like that. So it's pretty inexpensive. Next, we have, and this is actually a XFX. This is a Radeon 580 graphics card. This is a great graphics card. It's an 8 gigabyte. This is going to be my first time using this type of graphics card. I've never had or never even built a Ryzen AMD system before. I usually go with Intel. This is going to be a system for my son's build. So I heard a lot about these graphics cards. I heard that they're great. You can play some really good games on either ultra settings or high settings without it having any lags or drop frames. So I think this is going to be a good fit for this particular build, and we are going to continue to move forward with that. All right, so with that being said, we got a couple RGB fans from up here. These were pretty inexpensive. I think I got like 3 of them in a box for probably, I don't know, 15 to 20 bucks or something like that, but they are RGB. This is something that my son wanted to go with, so we are going to use that for this particular build. Again, for the processor, I said we are going to go with the Ryzen 5 2600. This is going to be perfect for a gaming CPU as well as recording, especially if it's something that you're trying to go for inexpensive. Now, there's big talk around the industry that Intel and Ryzen are going head to head, which they always have been, but they said that Ryzen tends to be the better processor for lesser money. Now, whether that's true or not, I really don't care, because I edit videos, I record music, I do video editing, I do graphics, the whole 9 yards. And I've been using Intel for years. Yeah, it's pretty pricey, but Intel has never let me down. So I continue to stick with Intel processors personally. But I have heard a lot of good things about AMD Ryzen CPU, so we are going to continue to use that for this particular build, and I'm going to trust the reviews and think that the performance more than likely is going to go great in this build. I know it works well with the board. Everything is compatible with the memory, the graphics card, so we should be good in that area. Also, this is pretty inexpensive. If you had to compare this to, say, a i5 or even an i7, you're going to pay probably $300 for i7, maybe $350, and for i5 you're still going to pay around 200 and something bucks. They probably be a little bit cheaper, but this one was only, I believe, $117 or something like that. So really inexpensive. Now, as far as the power supply, we had an extra power supply laying around the house. 750 is kind of overkill for this particular build. If you go to PCPartPicker.com, you pretty much put in all the parts that you want to use for your build, and it'll let you know how much wattage you actually need for your build. 750 is overkill, but it's all we have to work with right now. Otherwise, I'll just have to go out and spend more money to buy a new one, maybe like a 500. But if I could recommend, I would recommend probably EVGA, I believe it is, 80 plus bronze at 500 watts will be perfect for this build. But since this is all we got, we're going to go ahead and use this for now. Other than that, I'm going to be installing a 2 terabyte hard drive that I'm waiting to come in the mail from Amazon into this build. Also for some extra storage. That way we can put some games and our videos that we're going to be editing and our beat files and all these different things that we're going to be editing for this particular build. We're going to have them on a separate drive so they're not on a SSD drive and don't slow our computer down. Other than that, I don't really want to talk too much. Also, make sure that you get you a screwdriver. I like this little kit called Hyper Tough 44 piece. This I used on the last build that I did, and it comes in handy really for any computer build, just because a lot of the screws, the flatheads, the whole 9 yards, everything is just pretty much real small. It's really good for the screws that you'll need for this build. It's very convenient. You can take it on the go. So definitely want to have that. And then also have some zip ties so you can hide your cables in your CPU. In your PC, and they're not all tacky. Zip ties are really good. So if I have any extra, always keep these around. If not, just try to make it work. Other than that, I don't want to talk too much. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this build and show you the final product once it's done. All right, keep on watching. All right, so go ahead and get your processor out the box. And here in this box, gonna have some instructions. Here it is. This is your Ryzen CPU, Ryzen 5 2600 CPU. This is gonna go into the motherboard, okay? So be very careful with this. Don't be touching it on either side because you can damage the CPU, stopping it from working. You don't want to get fingerprints and all that stuff all over it, and you don't want to bend the pin, so be very careful. And then also that comes in here is your actual fan. This fan is going to keep it cool. I could have went with a better one and bought another one, upgraded, but sometimes people just like to be fancy. This one will definitely get the job done. And this one, as you can see, it has its own thermal paste already applied, so I won't have to apply any on there. Just attach it to the board, get it tied down. Everything gonna be good from there. Okay, so I'm just gonna sit that here. Now on here, on the motherboard, it has these brackets that I'm gonna need to go ahead and remove. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get the screwdriver and take these brackets off so I can be able to get this thing put in place and pinned down. All right, so you went ahead and moved that, removed that. Now the next thing that you want to do is, before we put our fan on there, we just want to open this up. Make sure you can see it. And you want to be very careful. Now, you want to try to grab this along the side. Again, you don't want to grab it on the top, or you don't want to grab it on the pins. You don't want to bend the pins, and you don't want to grab it on the top. There's a little triangle there. That's where, and there's also a little triangle that's on the motherboard where the CPU actually goes for the indicator to show you exactly where that triangle needs to line up. You line that up there, everything should sit in place just perfectly. It should fall right in there without being off-centered or anything. There's going to be a little triangle right here, and that's going to be the triangle that you line it up and match it up with. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is just pull this little bar out, slide it out to the left, and lift it up like that. You can see that. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to sit it in there just like that. It should fall right into place and sit firmly in there. Okay, so now you're just going to push this down and slide it right back under there. Boom. You're good to go on that portion of it. The CPU's in there. It's not going anywhere. It's not moving. Okay. So now in the process, what you want to go ahead and do next is put your fan on. Now this is going to be for your CPU fan. This fan is going to go where it says CPU fan on this board. So in the process, I want to make sure that I have this turned this way to be able to plug that in when I need to. All right, there's a bracket at the bottom that's gonna hold the fan in place. So make sure that you're holding it so it don't fall out, okay? So it can stick out like that. And what you wanna do is just go ahead and sit that on there and line that up as best you can. Like that. And what I'm gonna do for right now is I'm gonna hold it, and when I hold it I'm just gonna twist it in place. Make sure you can see that on camera. Now I'm holding it on a bracket of the motherboard. I'm not trying to hold any other area of the motherboard because I don't want to get my fingerprint all on it. Now it is better if you go ahead and sit this thing down, but in the process, I just want to go ahead and hold it up this way so I'm not sitting it down on a table. I'm going to tighten this one a little bit more. Now this board, or the particular way that this fan works, is that once you're tightening it, it'll pretty much click and let you know. You pretty much can't go any further than what you're supposed to. So you pretty much can't damage this with trying to over tighten it or anything. Okay. You want to do it in a cross diagonal. So you start at one, go across, do the other one, go across. Now I'm going to take the CPU fan where it says label CPU fan. It's a 4-pin. Some of them may be 3, but I'm just going to slide that on very gently. There we go. It's in. I do want to kind of tuck that under there for right now because that's probably going to be a little distracting to my RAM, but that should be good enough just as is. Okay, so I got that. Next thing I want to do, if you need to zoom out, see, I'm going to go ahead and get my my RAM and a board. Okay. So now what you want to do is usually the board will tell you which ports to use. And on here, I don't know if you can see it. You probably need to get a close-up. But on the board should be labeled DIMM A1, DIMM A2, DIMM B1, and DIMM B2. And next to DIMM A2 and DIMM B2, they have stars. So that's basically telling you to use those 2 ports first, okay? So I'm going to put the first one into DIMM A2, which is the second one over here. And then you also, on your memory, it's going to have a gap in between letting you know how many pins is what, where they go in the actual slot for your memory. So you just want to line that up, and you'll usually be able to tell if it can fit in there or not. Here you have your little latches. Here you have your latches to go ahead and pop this open. Now we don't need all of them popped open, but just the ones you need. So I'll go ahead and close this one, and I'll close this one. So we need DIMM A2, and we need to see if this is going to line up there in general. So if it doesn't go this way, you'll know it doesn't line up with the little gray marker on the slot. So you want to flip it around and make sure that it matches up. All you want to do is just slot that in there. Slot that in the first one. That seems like it's lined up. Push it down until you hear it snap into place. Okay? Once you hear it snap into place, you're good to go. Same thing. Line this up. There we go. All right. So the RAM is installed. Good to go on that. Everything so far looks on the board. If you get a new board, make sure that you check everything on the board. Make sure that there's no pins or anything bent or anything missing. If you have experience with doing this, just make sure that the pins are in good condition. All right, so this is good to go. Okay, so this is the IO shield. This is, you'll know when it's spaced in the right way. You want to make sure that the words, you can see the words on there. HDMI, everything should be facing outward and upwards. The words shouldn't be upside down or anything like that. Also, you want to make sure that you're not installing it like this. I believe we did that like on my wife's build when we first started doing this thing or whatever. And yeah, it was in backwards. So just try not to do that. It's pretty much self-explanatory. You just want to be very careful with trying to put this thing in there. So when you line it up, you want to make sure that you push from the outside and not the center. Don't push it in the middle. If you just guide your hands, I pretty much guide it like this when I push. And I push my hands. I pretty much guide it and push upward all the way, okay? Should be nothing hard. It should be nothing tough. And there we go. All right. I have this in place and I'm good to go. And that's what it should look like. Wasn't too hard at all. I know most people complain that it's a pain in the butt, but if you just be gentle, then it should go in there. If you have to force it a little bit, just don't push the middle. All right, so that's good to go. So I'm gonna close this back. And in the process, I should go ahead and just take this door off. Now, all these cables in here, long story short, they are going to go to your buttons at the top. So you're going to have the USB, you're going to have some fan cables, you're going to have the power switch cables. That's pretty much everything that you're going to have. Reset buttons, the whole 9 yards. These are going to be your power cables that are going to go to the motherboard. So all these are going to need to connect to the motherboard. Just make sure that none of them are damaged straight out of the package. The USB, everything should be good to go. So I'm going to just take this off real quick. I probably should be doing this last because I need to just go ahead and get the motherboard in, but you know, I may need something here, so I'm not gonna trip. USB 3.3, I believe 3.0 or 3.1, one of the two. And then these are gonna be a lot of your power cables here. These are gonna be the most important audio cables that we have in here as well. USB cables. That's pretty much what these are. And this is going to be all your power LEDs, power switches, everything. These cables here. Okay. This is a microfiber cloth that they gave you to help keep your tempered glass clean. So that's pretty good and handy to have. The positive thing about the micro ATX cases, and I'm pretty sure it may do it in the majority of them, but for these, for sure, for the ones that I've built, they come with already a few standoffs in them, so they give you a few extra. Make sure that you refer back to your manual for your motherboard to see how many you actually need for your particular board. If you have extras, you'll be good to go. All right. This board is going to require, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 standoffs. So right now there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's only 6 in a board. 2, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to try to sit this in here and see how many standoffs we're actually going to need. So you just want to line this thing up as much as possible. You're gonna once you're able to look and see, you're gonna see where the actual places to where you're gonna need to have the extra standoffs in the board. So I don't know if you can see it, but this is a little standoff. It's really, really small. Not really sure if you're able to see that. Can you focus on that for me? Really small standoff. So I'm just going to put that in a board right here, one on this outside. The positive about it is that once you take the front casing off, you just pull it off. It's going to feel
a little scary.
Yeah, it's going to feel a little scary, like you're going to break it, but you're not. Just try to be careful and it will come off.
Be gentle because these are plastic and they can break and they can bend.
Yeah, so just be very careful with that. Again, we're going to do it the same way. We want these fans to go ahead and get the air flow to go in this way. So we want to make sure that we put the fans in there correctly. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's a place for the fans, and you just kind of figure out where you're going to sit it. Okay, got one in there. Was that a screw? Gonna go ahead and put this one at the bottom.
Not all the way, you're gonna have to slide out.
All right, guys, so check this out. If you're wondering why I had the entire setup set up outside of the case, it was because I wanted to make sure that the computer was actually gonna boot without having any issues. It really sucks to go ahead and install everything in a computer and then realize that the computer's not booting. And sometimes it may be because of the memory, it could be because of the power supply, it could be because of the CPU not seated properly, a graphics card. It could even be something as minor as the I/O shield prongs or metal actually sticking inside of the USB port and giving the computer a short, causing it not to boot. Now, you don't want to go through the whole entire process of hooking the computer up and something happens not to work, because you'll still have to take everything out again and do the process of elimination. So I recommend that everybody just go ahead and set it up outside of the case first to make sure that it works, and then go ahead and install everything inside of the case once you see that everything is good to go. Now, as you can see, I have all my standoffs inside of the board. Now I'm going ahead and put the screws in. I got the motherboard sitting in place perfectly with the IO shield. Now I'm putting the screws inside the motherboard, and I'm going to go ahead and get this thing seated properly and continue to move forward. This particular process isn't very hard at all. You just want to make sure that your motherboard sits up flush with your IO shield, and make sure that none of the metal from the IO shield is sticking inside of the USB port. Otherwise, you can short the board. Now, once you get all your screws installed, you want to make sure that your memory is seated properly. Make sure that it's sitting in the ports flush. If not, you may have issues with your board actually booting up, or your computer booting up. So make sure that you check your memory, make sure you check your CPU, and everything is seated in there properly. So now what I'm going to do in this process is just take my rear fan, and I'm going to look on my motherboard for a port that says system or channel fan, and I'm going to plug this particular fan into it. The reason being is because I don't want to be passing all the wires through the casing, trying to basically daisy chain this fan with the other system fans that I have in the computer. I don't want to have a bunch of clutter with my wiring, so I'm just going to plug this one straight into the motherboard by itself. And now if you notice, this particular fan has a Molex connector on there. What I don't want to happen is the Molex connector to be hanging down or hit anything else on the motherboard. So I'm just going to use a zip tie to go ahead and wrap up some of that extra cabling, so it's not, you know, hanging on my motherboard and touching the motherboard. Keep it tight, and I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. Now, some of you may have a 3-pin connector, but your motherboard may have a 4-pin. Don't freak out, just still plug it in to the 4-pin and you'll be good to go. Now, it may be a little bit difficult to go ahead and get some of these things pushed into the pins on the motherboard, but just apply some firm pressure and it should go all the way down. Just make sure that it sits flush. In the process, what I'm going to do is go ahead and just take a blade and cut some of that extra zip tie off, so it's not actually touching the fan or anything else on the motherboard, and you should be good to go. If you have a pair of scissors sitting around anywhere, just use those instead. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the cables from the actual case that's going to power the case, that's going to power the USBs, that's going to power the system fans, the whole 9 yards, and I'm going to pass them through the bottom of the case of the computer. This way, I'm going to give myself the opportunity to be able to distribute these cables into the right location on this motherboard, so everything isn't cluttered. All I'm doing in this process right now is kind of separating my cables and figuring out where I want everything to go. So I want all my power cables to the front panel connector to be separate. Go ahead and connect the HD audio, all USB cables, as well as speaker and power LED cables to the proper pins. Refer to your manual if need be. Now, I know I may be taking a pretty long time to go ahead and do this particular process, but I'm actually taking my time and making sure that I'm grabbing the right cables to plug into the right locations on the motherboard. Some motherboards will actually be labeled with the same thing that the cables say. Some may not. That's why I said it's key that you make sure that you refer to your actual manual. This particular board, on the cable, it said HD audio, but on the actual motherboard it said something completely different, that it forced me basically to refer to the manual to figure out where I needed to plug it in. So it can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes you will have boards that say exactly what it needs to say on there, and then other times it may be some type of abbreviation or a total different name. So just make sure that you refer. A good rule of thumb that I would always say in a process is that if it don't fit, then don't force it. It's pretty self-explanatory. If there's something on the board that actually is labeled to what it's supposed to be, then plug it in. If not, just match up the pins, and if the pins look like they can actually go into that particular port, then actually plug them in. If not, then they probably don't go there. You definitely want to be very careful not to damage or bend the pins. If you notice, it's taking me some force to continuously try to get the ports to sit down flush. Once I get it on there, everything is good to go, but you want to make sure that you turn it to an angle that will assure you that it's sitting flush and that it's seated properly. And any of you who are continuing to freak out, here's another reminder. Now, this is by far the most challenging portion of actually putting a computer together. It's the front panel connectors. These front panel connectors are by far the most important thing and will determine whether your computer boots or not in most cases. These connectors are going to control your power switch, your reset buttons, anything at the top of the case. It's definitely going to be important and key to make sure that you do not damage those particular pins or those particular cables. Now, if you happen to hook this stuff up and say your front panel connector power switch isn't working, then you can go ahead and take everything outside of the case and go ahead and test it with a screwdriver. Now, I'm not going to give you guys any tips on that. Just look it up on YouTube, because you have to do that with caution. It can be very dangerous. It's not something that I recommend you doing without any experience. All right, to give you a free guide, you're going to have 2 rows of pins. You want to start at the top left with the power LED, positive, followed by the negative, followed by the power switch, positive, negative, and then on the bottom row, starting at the left, you want to have the HDD, positive, followed by the negative, followed by the reset switch, positive, negative. On the connectors, there will be a little arrow letting you know which one is positive and negative. Always put the positive to the left first. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to take my SSD or my SATA cable to my hard drive and plug it into the port on the motherboard. It will be labeled SATA on your motherboard, so go ahead and refer to your manual and see which one your motherboard actually wants you to use first. There may be a particular port that is going to give you better performance for your hard drive, so just be sure to double check. But most of the time they do the same thing. Okay, so what we did was we went ahead and took the hard drive, SATA drive SSD bracket from the bottom of the case. Instead of trying to mount it up there at the top, we weren't going to have any room for the SATA and data cables to sit flush, and we don't want to have any issues trying to get the case panel back on there. So we're just going to mount it on this one, and then once we get the SATA drive in tomorrow, we're going to go ahead and still mount that at this in this case at the bottom of the bracket, and both of them should be able to sit in there with no problem. Now, if you're wondering why I backtracked on this particular portion of the video, it was for one reason, and actually a good reason. When I decided to install my SSD in this particular case, I wanted it to be installed on the back of the case. Now, the reason why this was a huge issue was because where the SSD port was on the back of the case, my SATA cable would not reach to my motherboard, and it was causing all kind of cabling issues, and it wasn't long enough. So I decided to go ahead and take my SSD and install it on the top of the bracket at the bottom of the case where my actual SATA hard drive is going to be installed as well. You don't see it in this particular clip, but I do have 2 hard drives installed in this one bracket, my 2 terabyte hard drive, 3.5, and then my small SSD hard drive installed on top of it, making it really convenient for cabling. I just want to make sure I shouldn't have any issues with it sitting flush or anything, because it's going to be under the case, so it should be just fine. So yeah, we're just going to pass that back through there. So go ahead and place that back in there and get that lined up. All right, so now what I'm gonna do with this particular portion of the video is go ahead and install a graphics card. This particular portion of the video is very important. You want to make sure that your graphics card is actually seated in there properly. Make sure that it snaps in or that it's seated flush. If not, then you may have booting issues with the computer. It may be causing problems with the computer when you try to boot it. You don't want that to happen. Also, you'll have bad readings, or it won't read at all if you don't have it pushed in all the way. So make sure that you double check. Once you do this particular portion, you want to make sure that your computer's actually laying down when you put the graphics card in, because it is pretty heavy, and these big graphics cards do tend to hang down, possibly damaging the port that it goes into. So you just want to make sure that you lay it down, install it, and put the screws in that's going to actually hold it in place tighter so it doesn't have much movement. Now it's time to go ahead and install the power supply, also known as the PSU. You want to make sure that your fan is facing downward toward the dust filter of the computer case. This is very important. Make sure that you install this properly. Also, if you have any particular issues with your power supply, maybe not booting the computer or not powering something on your motherboard, be sure to take it to your closest location and go get your power supply tested. If something is not booting and you have everything installed properly, then you probably need to go ahead and replace the power supply. But you're gonna have to do the process of elimination. This key is very important. You have to make sure that it actually is the power supply. It could be the motherboard, it can be the actual memory sticks, it can be the power supply, it could be a fan, it could be a bad capacitor on the motherboard. Everything you're gonna have to test out if your computer is not working. Don't be so quick to throw money away and start replacing things. Actually find out how to test it out first and then start spending money on anything that you may need to replace. Now, the power supply is very important. It's gonna have a lot of connectors on there that's gonna actually power up the motherboard. Some of the main key connectors and cables that you're gonna have to your power supply is gonna be the CPU connector, the 24-pin connector, the PCIe connector that's gonna go to the graphics card, your data connectors that's gonna go to any of your hard drives, as well as any Molex or fan connectors that's gonna go to any of your fans. Now, a lot of this is gonna be pretty much self-explanatory. A lot of the cables and the connectors are gonna match up with the ports. Again, if it don't fit, then don't force it. If the connector look like it actually don't fit in that port, then don't try to force it there. Everything will be pretty much clear where it actually goes. In the process, you want to make sure that you go ahead and organize your cables and put them through the proper holes in your case that's going to be closest to their port on the motherboard. Don't try to fit all your cables in one port. Now, you want to go ahead and take the power supply cable connector that's labeled CPU and plug it into the port on the motherboard that says 12 volt. If you do not plug this in properly, then your computer will not boot. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is go ahead and grab my 24-pin connector. This is also something that you want to make sure that you pay attention to when you plug it in. If you notice, some of these are like squares, and then some of the squares are kind of like rounded a little bit. You want to make sure that you match that up and plug it in to the motherboard properly. There will be a little lip that you can hear once you plug it in. It should snap in. If it doesn't sit flush, then likely you got it the wrong way or it's not pushed in all the way. This is another one of those key components that if you don't plug it into the motherboard properly, it's likely that your computer will not boot up. Also, to throw in there real quick, I went ahead and daisy chained my two system fans at the front of my case, and I plugged them in into the system fan header at the top of my motherboard. Now back to the 24-pin connector. Again, you want to make sure that this is plugged in properly because you don't want to have any issues with the computer not booting. Make sure that it's sitting flush, everything is good to go, and then we can go ahead and move on to the next step. The next step will be the PCIe cable. This is going to be very, very important when it comes to your graphics card. So depending on your graphics card, you may need one set of connectors or you may need two set of connectors. Some graphics cards don't take any cable and connectors whatsoever. They're just powered by the port in a motherboard. But in this particular case, it's going to take me to attach this one PCIe cable and go ahead and plug it into my graphics card. So you want to go ahead and snap that in until you hear the click and make sure that it's pushed in all the way. Now let's talk about cable management. This portion is most important. If you do not get these cables under control and actually pushed away and hid away in this case, you will not be able to get the side panel door back onto this case. It is extremely frustrating when you can't get the side panel back on the case because your cables are everywhere and sticking out, bulging out. So go ahead and hide those up under the case. Now I'm gonna take a zip tie and I'm gonna basically organize my cables and zip tie my cables to the actual computer case so they can sit more flush and I'm able to get the side panel back on. Now in this particular case, I'm using a non-modular power supply, which means that it has all the cables connected to the power supply and I can't remove them. If you buy a fully modular or a semi-modular, it will only allow you to use the cables that you need, making it more convenient to get rid of all those extra cables. Now if you notice, I'm actually able to get my side panel back onto the computer case with no problem. Everything is sitting flat, everything is sitting flush. I have no issues, it's sitting nice, it's looking good, and I am pretty happy with this build. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put the tempered glass back onto this case. By the way, this case only cost me like $55, and to have tempered glass, it's amazing. I'm completely blown away by this case. Now let's go ahead and do what everybody's been waiting for, the peel. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead and pull that thing off. That's completely satisfying. It's probably my favorite part. I used to actually pull this stuff off before, but I realized that when I was doing that, I had fingerprint all over the tempered glass, and I didn't want to do that. So, you know, it's just better to wait to do it after you get your build done. I'm loving the theme. I'm loving the way that the computer looks. I think it looks great. I think I did a great job, and I can't wait to build the next one. Now we're going to go ahead and flip the power supply switch and make sure that the computer works. And voila, there it is. The computer works. I have life. I'm happy with it. I think the computer looks great, and I think it was a success. Now that the computer has booted and it actually posted to the monitor, I'm going to go into my BIOS and make sure that I switch my settings to go ahead and boot from my USB drive so I can load Windows 10. Once you do that, go ahead and download your BIOS as well as any other driver for your motherboard and install it and update it immediately. Now for some gaming.
Keep pressing them.
Hey guys, by the way, I went ahead and installed all my video editing software, my photo software, my recording software and everything. And I tell you what, this computer is a beast. I can make beats and everything. So be sure to subscribe.